All right, great to be back in here on a Monday, normal week for us as we began our preparation this morning for Utah Tech. But I think reflecting back on Saturday's game, much like I thought after the game, there was going to be plenty of things within that game that we can correct. Certainly New Mexico made their fair share of plays to contribute to what the score got to be. But ultimately, as we got into that fourth quarter, we scored right at the beginning of the fourth quarter, cut it to 10, made it a two-score game. I think we felt like at that point it was within reach, and what we needed is we need to make some plays from that point forward, and we did that. There was a few plays that they didn't make. On the flip side, we certainly didn't make them all in the fourth quarter, but ultimately, with the big play on Adams' run, I think we were right around 5 at that point. Now down 3. I think everybody on our sideline felt like, okay, here we go, and I would guess there was some doubt creeping in on their side, and that's just the way this game goes. And fortunately, the defense was able to get the ball back for the offense, and that 2-minute drive that our offense put together with a timeout in hand. Got I think only in the 1 third down through that whole stretch, maybe 2 at the end. I guess it was 2. We made big plays on those third downs. Was really impressive. You practice those situations a lot. I think when you have a quarterback like Tommy that's been in a few of those situations through the course of his career, the moment certainly wasn't too big for him, and he executed real well. We had some guys on the other end of those catches, certainly that those throws that made some good catches, and then offensive line wise, we stood up to a lot of pressure through that stretch, and ultimately got it down there. And first and goal, we'd hoped to preserve a little bit more time than we did, but ultimately we scored on that play. We still had a timeout in hand, so it was great to get that touchdown and get the extra point to make it a 4-point game, and ultimately just have to play a couple more snaps of defense after that. So extremely pleased with the outcome, and I think our guys took a good look at it this morning. I know our coaches did as we went through things yesterday, and again, understand that there's a lot to improve upon, and that's really what we need to see out of this week is a step forward. We have another opponent in Utah Tech that there's a lot of uncertainty, even though we played them last year. That's a lot of games ago, and for them it's a lot of different players, a new coach, a new coaching staff, and obviously we're going to their place this year, so a new environment this game will be played in. So we got to really focus on what we can do to get better, while again predicting to some degree what we think Utah Tech will do in this game on Saturday night. Another game where we'll be dealing with the elements. I think it'll be probably 90 plus at 8 o'clock on Saturday night. So I appreciate how our guys did work through that this past Saturday, and we'll need to do that again down in St. George. So with that, I'll open up for questions.
You mentioned, or you talked about kind of being a little off guard with some of the plays. How much do you think, not New Mexico being kind of so uncertain going in, how much did that play a factor, especially in the start?
Honestly, I think the start, not much. The pressure that they brought, where they got the sack, fumble, was something we prepared against. We didn't get off quickly enough on the interior. Tommy hung on to the ball a little too long, and ultimately they made that play. I think where things shifted a little bit was their drive before the half, when they went to that bigger personnel package on offense. I know that was a 2-play sequence. They ran the ball for, I think, a significant gain, and then the quarterback pulled it. They went back to that a few times in the second half. I think ultimately that heavier package, what they did, we did stop them. We got attacked for a loss, which created a longer field goal in the fourth quarter. But that was one thing that they hadn't shown. I think ultimately how much pressure they brought as the game went along. It was pressures that they'd shown going back in time, but it wasn't maybe at that frequency. So I think we adjusted fairly well. I think the things that went against us, again, were unfortunate things that are doing at times, and then they made some plays. I know the passes downfield, when we get pass interferences, that's nothing scheme-wise. It was poorly played, balls in the air by a couple of our guys. So you just – it's a handful of things that go on both sides, and ultimately, we again find ourselves down 17 right away after the play in that began the second half, the scoop and score, and for our defense to ultimately not give up any points in the second half. Now they moved it a little bit. I think that's something we didn't talk much about after the game on Saturday. That was obviously pretty significant. They missed a couple field goals, and really the wind picking up and really changing some of the dynamics of the game, the passing game. I think we were chasing points, but it was really hard to throw through a stretch. Obviously, their second missed field goal, I put that on the wind entirely. So yeah, it was an interesting game in a lot of ways. But ultimately, the newness piece, I think played a role, but wasn't really significant.
And Tommy didn't run nearly as much as he has almost in every game of his career. I know a lot of just hands off on reads. Was it as simple as a lot of reads, or was there any kind of design to not run up too much?
Well, I think we're looking at a 12-game regular season right now. I think we're going to be a little bit more selective when we choose to run him. With the amount of read game that we do have in our run game, a defense can dictate that at times. And if that means the ball is going to the running backs more often than it's in his hands, I think we're fine with that. So I think that would be an intentional thought. Even his touchdown run really should have been Adam running it. It was a high snap. I think Adam scores a little bit easier than Tommy had to score on that play, but we'll need to use his legs from time to time, but the volume I think isn't going to be what we've seen in the past.
You talked about that 2-minute drive, Ty's catch right before he set up that Scott Trey run into the end zone. Can you talk about his ability to make that catch?
Yeah, it was, there's two ends to that. I think Tommy, while maybe early in the game was getting out of the pocket at times and not continuing to see things, I think as that game went along, he did a much better job. And on that play, and there was a couple in that sequence, he hung in there. Ty sat down like he should. Tommy put a catchable ball in his vicinity. It was closely guarded, so the ball brought Ty down like I'm sure Tommy intended, and we needed to make that play, and that's why Ty's out there, is to make those catches. So getting that ball inside the 5, that was a third down. How we would have treated fourth down there would have depended on the distance, quite frankly. I think we were close enough where we're kicking a field goal and tying the game up was an option, but I'm glad that we were able to make that play and ultimately win the game in regulation.
Yeah, and we also heard that Ty kind of had a halftime speech for the guys. Can you just talk about his leadership and how it's even maybe taken a step up this season?
Yeah, that was somewhere in between when I had gone in there. But Ty's a really fierce competitor, and I think Ty coming here to Montana State, a lot of it had to do with his competitive spirit, as much as he was motivated to catch passes and all that kind of things. Like, Ty wanted to win, and he's a fiery competitor that I think what's evolved in him, and it is in most of our transfer guys that are multiple year guys. They turn the page in year 2, their comfort level of stepping up and leading, whether it's been Ty now or I think what we've seen with Julius, Sean Chambers, Cleveland Thomas. I mean, we've got a bunch of those guys that have been these 2-year guys. He's really stepped up within that group that has quite a few young guys. So appreciate whatever Ty must have said at halftime to make a impression on the guys. But I would imagine it was just, hey, we're not out of this. We got to go compete, fellas, and ultimately that's what we did.
Kind of some few new guys in the O-line, right tackle, Cedric, Connor, guard. I guess what you kind of see from that group.
Well, we played well enough to win. It wasn't perfect, and it wasn't going to be. I think looking at guys like Cedric and Titan really playing their first extended time, they had both had some plays here and there. Titans go back over the course of 2 years. Cedric is a true freshman last year, but I think they both held their own. Connor moving in, I think that's just a sign of maturity in his, with his evolution, so to speak. You play 12 games as a redshirt freshman. You do the things he did last year. And then we we figured we could stretch him going back to the spring, playing him at guard a little bit for the potential of this. And our next best mode was to put Titan and to put Cedric in rather than manufacture some other guards. So to put our I think our best two linemen in Connor and Marcus at the guard positions, and then be able to plug the next two best guys we felt like in that tackle was why we ended up looking a lot different on Saturday than we would have in our first depth chart we put out at the beginning of fall camp. But that's a credit to Coach Johnson getting those guys ready. It's a credit to those guys, whether it is any one of those guys in the interior. Cole's mind going into this year is he was going to be a starting guard, and you got our two tackles both sliding into play guard. It's them understanding what we're trying to do. It's that plan being clearly articulated to them by Coach Johnson, myself, I guess, and those guys just say, hey, what's ever best for the team? And I think they performed admirably. We ran for a lot of yards, but I know there's plenty of room for improvement too.
And then obviously I know all the Big Sky team playing last week for Players of the Week, Adam and McCade and Brent Vigen.
Yeah, I don't know how that works, I guess. They're up against each other, I suppose. I think in a given week where there are some other teams playing, especially early in the season, I hope that Adam's performance would have stuck out and he would have been in the mix because he did some phenomenal things. The run is what catches everybody's eyes, but he protected well. That catch that he had, I think, that got us inside the 20, got us a first down. On that play, he had cut block a defender. He did his job in pass protection, rolled out, and really made a challenging catch. And then I know Brendan's impact is significant on a day like that where they fair catch two balls inside the 10. He changed the field in both those instances, really kept them from wanting to go after another drive before the half. And then he kept pounding the ball in the end zone, even with that wind in the second half, keeping them to 0 return yards in the game was all his doing, really. And that's significant. And Cade, I think, was all over the place. Statistically, had a good game, and that's what we expect of him.
You mentioned Titan. What kind of impressed you most, both physically as an offensive line, but also mentally, and being able to come back from all those injuries?
Yeah. You think about Titan's journey. He was signed and recruited when I got the job, but obviously, frame-wise, getting a chance to, I guess, get to know him a little bit over Zoom initially, liked the prospects, I guess. And he came in that first fall, and you could see athletically again at that frame. Okay, we have this developmental type tackle that we want, but then he ends up having double shoulder surgery that first fall. Played, I think it was just a game maybe that second year, and he'd put on all this weight at the same time, so he really wasn't what he ultimately could be. And then you fast forward again, injury problems last year, so I would say the same thing. And so now he's settled into this first stretch of football where, okay, the size, the weight, the height, all that stuff, and then this appreciation for being able to play the game is what is maybe the most apparent thing with him. A lot of guys get injured like he has. They turn away from the game. They don't want to keep finding a way, fighting through it, and that's the exact opposite of Titan. He's so grateful for where he's at right now, and that's a contagious type of personality to have on your football team. Just how much he appreciates this, and if that's just how he was brought up or who he is, I think a lot of credit goes to a lot of people before he got here, namely his upbringing with his parents and his family. But, really appreciate his perseverance to get to this point. And it was great, for him to go out there and play the way he did. And, hopefully that's just the beginning of a great run for him.
Kicker, we see Casey's on the depth chart, so I'm curious about that. But then also Miles Senstead making all the POC. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, Casey, unfortunately, it was the previous Saturday. Had a slight quad. I don't even know what you want to strain. Let's just call it what it is, I guess. Didn't know how serious it would be. Tried to rehab and get him back out there through Monday and Tuesday. I think it became apparent that this is going to be a couple-week deal, and really we hadn't determined who was going to kick, who was going to place kick at that point. I think both Casey and Miles, rose to the top as far as our fall camp competition went, and they were very similar in their numbers. Charting every day, having something competitive most every day of fall camp. So I think when we had to turn to Miles, felt comfortable with that, and ultimately, we only put him in a position to kick the 5 PATs, but again, as that game went along, that was easier said than done too. So, to have all those 5 go through, and I think it was a great start from a place kicking perspective this year. We'll see where it continues to take us. Chose not to kick a 49-yard field goal early in the first quarter, and that was, I was gonna kind of hold strong to the 30-yard line where we were gonna kick, and we weren't there. And we had a good play designed. Unfortunately, Taco fell on that 4th and 8. I think he would have been wide open there, and that's the way it went. It wasn't that we ultimately can't make a 49-yarder with Miles. That was my thought process going in, and we'll need him to build off that performance here in the second game.
That was the first game with the coordinators and their new roles officially. How did you see Bailey and Walker in those roles?
Yeah, I thought on that side of things, I think our communication was good. I think how they saw the game, how we adjusted to some things, going back to what Victor had asked before about predicting and some of those things along those lines. I think we thought that Dampier would run quite a bit more. So if there was an early adjustment we made defensively, it was, okay, after a bunch of series, he's not out here to run, because that's really what he was out in the field to do, and he was very effective with it last year. So adjusting some of our thought process there, I thought the defensive staff did a good job of just that. I thought they worked together well at halftime, again, to sort out the heavier package that they went to. I thought offensively we were relatively clean with most everything. All the calls never work. It's just the nature of anything you do, and the other team's obviously trying as well. And we were dealing again with that chasing point situation where it was really windy, which made that stretch kind of end of the third, beginning of the fourth a little bit more complicated. But I thought Coach Walker remained very calm through that stretch. How we function in the 2-minute, large part of the credit does go to the guy calling the plays and remaining calm up there. And in between series, being able to instill in Tommy, a sense of confidence while wasn't always going the way he wanted to, was a credit to Tyler too. So I guess at the end of the day, real happy with our first game from both of them.
You talked about Casey a little bit, but any other injury updates?
Yeah, Elijah Elliott went down on a kickoff return. It would seem like he's going to be out for a few weeks, and is that will he be back by conference? I hope that's the case for him. But really, that was about it. I know Zach Black went out, and he went back in. I don't think of the guys that ultimately didn't play in this game, we will get any back for this week. We may be hopeful for the next week as we come home.
I didn't see Miles Jackson on the 2 week. Is there any update on him?
He should have been the starting nickel, should he not? He should be the starting nickel.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
Caden Dollar will be starting free like we started the game.
Okay, gotcha. Just wanted to
So, maybe.
on that. Oh, and then I guess J2, is there any update?
Yeah, we won't be traveling this week. Again, hopeful maybe for next week, but we will see.
I guess it's just Utah Tech, anything you've seen in their offense and expect there?
Yeah. A team we played last year, they do return some guys that played in that game, probably more so on the defensive side. And, you got to look, I think, strongly. They brought in a couple transfer quarterbacks. So I think offensively, just like last week, I think you got to see that's maybe where things start, as far as how they want to build their offense. I know if Deacon Hill from the transfer from Iowa is their starter, I would suggest to lean more to a passing offense. I know they seem to like their skill based on what the fall prospectus and just some of the fall preview stuff looks like. So pro style to some degree, I suppose, but more of a 50-50 type of offense because I do think they got some good running backs at the same time. Defensively, you certainly got to look to what Coach Anderson ran at Stanford. He was a longtime defense coordinator there, and they were really good through that stretch. A lot of big bodies. I know that a little bit different than maybe what they looked like last year. But definitely some guys that were on that field last year that did some good things against us. So, we can't practice against ghosts this week. We got to be confined with what we think we're going to get, and then like last week, be able to get in that game and make some adjustments to whatever they ultimately are doing. I think that's what you do. I think defensively, I think we can go back and really, I think we can look at some stuff from Stanford. I think that, because they were together at Stanford, Monahan and Coach Anderson, and try to pick up the pieces in between. On the offensive side, it's a little bit of a search. You try to do the best you can as far as looking at, just how that's played out in previous years at those different schools, I guess. And like I said, if we got to look at both quarterbacks, and I just bring up Hill just because he's the more notable of the quarterbacks. But okay, let's say he's the quarterback. Let's study what he's done, what his strengths are. It doesn't necessarily lend itself to exact particular formations and plays or anything like that, but it at least gives you an idea what his strengths are. I think you can look at that both ways. I do think there is advantage that we have played another opponent for sure. We found out some things maybe about ourselves, but I do think they do have a distinct advantage, and they can look and say, okay, this is who Montana State is. Whether it's all of last season, certainly last week, and really be able to dial that in. I think we did feel that a little bit last week with New Mexico. They had a pretty good sense. They had some good thoughts as far as where they could maybe attack us, and we were guessing a little bit. So I think it works both ways. I don't know that it's distinct one way or the other. I do like the fact that we do have at least a mark. We have a game behind us, and we need to get better this week, and we need to raise the bar in all ways. Well, I would say the two starting tackles felt good about it. Obviously, we put them out there for good reason, but that was their first starts, and that's tricky when you're throwing two new guys out there. One's a redshirt freshman, and one he's a fourth-year guy, but he has hardly played. I think on defense felt really good about the collective experience there. There weren't too many holes in that experience. I thought a couple guys, did quite well. I know we need to extend our depth a little bit more, on that side of the ball. Happy that we made all 5 of our place kicks from a guy that hadn't kicked in a game before, I guess. But I think a lot of the guys that did the things that they did in the game we were certainly counting on. Well, I think that's something we've worked real hard in. Certainly in my 3 years, is each one of these games counts the same, and that is not coach speak. We got to go about our business each week, and it really doesn't matter who we play, and I think we've done a pretty good job of that over 3 years. You get too high for a particular opponent, you are naturally going to get too low for one. It's just the nature of the beast. And while we did appreciate the opportunity to play an FBS team on national television, and I think there's a lot to be said for that. I think this next game is the next game, and it's the most important. And regardless of how our game against Utah Tech went last year, there's a lot of new things to the equation, new pieces of the equation, I guess. New coaching staff, a lot of new players, new environment. None of our players have played down in St. George, so you try to keep them on edge week in and week out to understand that the value of each game is just one. I know as games goes on and you hopefully stack up a good record, and the gravity of games maybe intensifies, but they all just count as one, and we got to treat this one really no different in that regard than last week.
Thanks, Coach.
Yep.
Coulter?
Yeah, Brent. On that same note, obviously, you spoke to the message to the players of the team. So much extra exposure that comes with this. How do you sort of make that a good thing without just exposure?
Well, yeah, we don't have an opportunity. I mean, we got Tim Brando doing our game. I mean, that doesn't come along every weekend. I know that. It was funny. Brody and Tommy and myself did a sit down with them on Friday, and I think they both came out of it and said, "Boy, they really knew what they were talking about." Yeah, you guys are professionals. They got to do this. They got to recalibrate every week with a new opponent, a new game. And I said Tim Brando was originally on game day, and Brody kind of looked at me like, holy cow. So that piece, being on SportsCenter, getting mentions, across the board because we were, kind of a singular game, and in the way the small number of games went last year, I think, or last weekend, it was pretty unique. So I think that's all good, and you got to appreciate any kind of exposure at the national level that we do get, but then be able to move on, and I hope a lion's share of our guys have played in big games, and I think the way we're covered, even though it's more regional in nature, I think it's an important deal. So it's not like our guys aren't used to being covered, I guess. So whether it's coming from a national perspective or a more regional perspective, I think they maybe don't always separate it. I think we do as coaches sometimes, just because we know how important that reach can be for a football program, for our athletic department, for our university. So, yeah, I think you move on, you enjoy it all, and you move on. And I know we were in here at 7 a.m. this morning, and I think everybody was able to move forward, watch that film, and go out and practice this morning relative to Utah Tech.
I know you and I talked about Tommy just getting the flow of the game. What can you say is about the way it sort of transpired for it? It seemed like the second half was much, much better and more accurate, but also just sort of turned into Mr. Clutch like he's supposed to do.
Yeah, I thought he kind of second quarter, I thought he had a pretty good stretch. I know we didn't end and we didn't score on that 2-minute drive that we had, but I thought he started making some plays and started I'd calm down is the wrong word, but just the game was maybe slowing down a little bit. I think the bullets were flying fast at the beginning, and that's more. I suppose that's some what they were doing, but just he's ready to go, wanting to make plays, and then when it came down to it at the end, there was a real calm, I do believe, about how he went out there, and I think he did what he would have expected to do, and I think he did what we would have expected of him in that moment, and that comes from experience, good experiences, bad experiences. You think about last year, we had 3 of those losses, we had 2-minute drives. I know he was quarterback in 2 of them. Well, he's only quarterback in 1. He was only quarterback in Idaho. I guess Sean would have been in South Dakota State and North Dakota State. But even that Idaho game, down 3, touchdown to win, we move it pretty good, and we don't close it out. So I would hope that his thought process in preparing for this season, you can call back on those experiences, and I know we've gone through, we try to practice and replicate those experiences as much as possible. So you're a seasoned vet for all the good and the bad that's occurred in your career, and you hopefully learn lessons from both sides of those experiences. And he's a really good example of always moving forward, but maybe not forgetting the things that have put him in this position at the same time.
That leadership style always sort of being forward thinking and also being so stoic, kind of like he is. Seems like it rubs off on the rest of the team. I mean, how important is that for you guys off?
Yeah, offensive football in its most extreme moments, its most intense moments, I think that is the much better way to go about your business. You think about the Joe Montana pointing out John Candy in the Super Bowl right before they go on that drive. There's endless stories about quarterbacks going into that huddle, and that's the thing that the other guys talk about is just, okay, we knew he could do it because of how he was, the demeanor he had, how calm. If you go out there and you're frantic, boy, those other 10 guys are going to be frantic in their own right. So I think it's extremely critical to be able to execute in those tightest moments, to be, whether you believe it or not, just to be a guy that is outwardly is displaying that. And that's who Tommy is anyways. So I'm certain that our guys had a real sense of confidence going down the stretch because of who was steering the ship.
And Marcus Weir's got a lot of headlines the last couple months because of all of his great accomplishments, but playing at guard, it seems like involved at his level. I mean, you got national draft guys talking about how this guy's going to be a starter in the NFL soon and all these different things, but how impressed were you with his ability to slide over to right guard? I mean, I watched the game now.
Yeah, and it maybe is the long-term position that does suit him better at the next level, for one. I know this. Last year, he played guard against North Dakota State. He hadn't practiced a lot of guard until that was happening. Rush Reimer was out. We slid him in. We slid Jacob Kettles in, I think, at tackle. So point being, we've been much more intentional, and it was because it was something Marcus in the offseason, I think, went to Coach Johnson. He goes, if this is going to happen, I need some preparation. So Marcus is beyond being talented and strong and all that stuff. He's a tremendous student of the game, as much as any O-lineman that I can think of that I've been around. And that's studying the game, but that's understanding, too, that I just can't slide in there and it's just going to happen because I'm a superstar. So he probably went through fall camp, and even going back to spring ball, getting a really fair share of reps at right guard. And we didn't know exactly how Cole's situation was going to play out. Obviously, we didn't know Justice was going to get hurt. So it was done for good reason, but in large part it was fueled by Marcus, really making that request out of last year to say, hey, I need to prepare more inside. So I think that, as much as just his ability, allowed him to go in there and really shine on Saturday, because it is two different worlds, and it's different type of guys you're blocking, it's different angles, it's all that stuff, and it appeared that he was absolutely ready for the task.
Here's the little things that Adam Rose did in that game, and when he came on the show a couple of weeks ago, he was talking about how one of the hardest parts of D1 football for him was like the pass block, stuff like he wasn't really required to ever do when he was in high school. How much does that help a guy get on the field and at that position?
Oh, it's huge. When you can be an every down guy, it's either going to happen for you fairly early or it might not happen. I think there's a piece to understanding the game that doesn't come to every running back, seeing a big picture, understanding protections. Even having the knack for protecting isn't always an acquired skill. So, I think we knew his receiver skills were really good. He demonstrated that. His ball catching in high school was there. I think a lot of people maybe even looked at him as a receiver. When we saw him as a running back, in part because of all the things that he brought to the table, he'd been physical when he would play defense. So, he's been on a different pace than most young running backs, with obviously his ability to run is one thing, but just his understanding, his ability to put the weight on he's put on. I think it's just, his ascension, this just didn't happen. We've kind of seen this all through the the calendar year. Thought he had a great spring, and that was again setting himself up to be this every down back. So exciting for him. I think exciting for a program that he's done the things that he's done, and it's our hope, and I'm sure his, that this is just a start.
And lastly, for me, just playing in another hot one, I know you guys are sort of acclimated to this at this point, but what's the dynamic like just going on straight, relatively long road trips early this season?
Yeah, different for sure. And at the same time, I think going through last week's experience, making that trip, and we had a pretty flawless trip as far as air travel and all that kind of stuff. We dealt with the heat pretty well. Now the second half with the wind and the weather changing wasn't as extreme as the first half had been. So I know looking at this week, they put this game at 8 p.m. for a reason. I think the high in the day is going to be 100 plus. Game time is going to be what it is. The sun obviously won't be the same factor that it was, in the first part of the New Mexico game. But I do think it helps having these back to back. I think for our fans to have our home game be our first home game be our third game is unusual, but by the time we come home that next week, I think they'll have a good sense of who we are. And I know we traveled really well to Albuquerque. I hope it's the same this week. I've heard a lot of fans tell me they were going to make a double trip of it. They're down south anyways. Just move a little west. So I hope we have a big crowd there, and that always fuels us on the road. So, it is what it is. It's our schedule, and we'll take it on. And I do think last week's travel, the heat, and all that will definitely help us out this second time around.
It's not going to be too bad. It's going to be about 94 degrees at kickoff at 8 o'clock Saturday. You'll enjoy that.
Yep. Yeah, it was hot that first half of last week, so we're at least got that under our belt.
Dry heat. It's a dry heat.
Anything else in the room? All right, thanks.
Okay. Yep.